Welcome to the Bixby Lab launch. Thank you all for coming in. So one of the things which is exciting about Bixby Lab is it's a very timely service, we believe, because there's an increased need globally around the use of biometrics, identity, particularly in this COVID-related era, and particularly for remote onboarding style solutions. But the challenge for any of these systems is making sure that there's trust in the use, that they're appropriately risk managed, and that they've got the appropriate governance around the outside. And Bixby Lab is set up as the first laboratory in the Southern Hemisphere to have these particular set of accreditations, and we are well set up to be providing identity assurance style services and credentialing across a wide range of different applications and a wide range of different types of devices. So the journey to get to this point has been a long one. Biometrics, the sister organisation to Bixby Lab, has been around for over 20 years. And we've accomplished a lot of different biometric evaluations and testing over that time. And so we have a lot of experience across all of the different types of modalities in setting up a range of different testing to provide our clients with a good understanding of risks and also a good understanding of how their systems should be tuned. Recently, however, there's been a really encouraging push towards greater standardization in the industry. And so now there are a range of different accreditation programs, and we've started our journey last year to becoming a NIST NVLAP accredited lab, which will provide a very solid foundation for providing certification for biometric and identity related systems. So Bixby Lab, the Bixby in Bixby Lab stands for Biometrics, Identity, Experience and Evaluation. And Bixby Lab is going to provide a range of different services, in fact does provide a range of different services across all the way from certification, assurance, through to assessment, both in a lab circumstance as well as operationally. And through the work that we have done previously, we have worked in a whole range of different use cases, including this digital identity, biometrics for mobiles, financial services, secure facilities, lots of work in border control and automated border control systems, and customer authentication. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce the very talented team that we have as part of Bixby Lab. My name's Ted Dunstone, and I've been involved with biometrics for over 25 years, both in a research capacity and in commercial capacity. So I'm very excited to be at this point in the industry where biometrics is really gaining a very strong foothold, and where the assurance services that we provide are in greater need than ever before. I introduce my laboratory manager, Stuart Pope, who will be taking you through the rest of the presentation and the demonstrations. Liam Bowden-Smith is the assistant laboratory manager. He is currently manning the Teams keyboard, so if you get a message from him, if you need something, you can message him. Melinda Bartlett is a very experienced subject matter expert in biometrics, who is our quality manager. Soumya Singh is our laboratory technician, and she'll be also helping with. And we have Sandy Mark, who's also a laboratory technician. With that, I'm going to hand over to Stuart to take you through the rest of the presentation. Stuart.
Thank you, Ted. Yeah, my name is Stuart. I'm the laboratory manager here at Bixby Lab, and I'm going to start today's presentation and today's demonstration talking about biometric system testing and what defines a biometric product in the sense of something that we can and are equipped to test through the laboratory. So Biometrics is unique in that there are a lot of different parts that make up the overall biometric system, and there is a need to test all of the different biometric products that exist within that context. So some examples of different things that we've tested and are equipped to test through the laboratory includes things like mobile apps. So we have a range of different devices that we can test biometrics and identity-based mobile apps with. There are consumer devices as well, which obviously falls into things like mobile phones as well. So talking about products like Face ID, Touch ID, etc. We have access control units, which are self-contained units that often contain, they'll contain an acquisition device, a matching algorithm, liveness, all bound within one device. We also have acquisition devices themselves, and these are important to test because the acquisition device in a lot of ways determines the quality of the biometric data we get, which is very important downstream for good matching outcomes. And then lastly, of course, we can also test just raw matching algorithms as well. That's another biometric product that exists within here. So the question I pose is around how can you test all of these different types of products in a way that is effective, useful, standardized, including to the relevant international standards, which I'll talk about in a moment, and also where required, performing testing that is then comparable, because there may be a need to compare the performance, the biometric matching performance or liveness performance of something that exists within a mobile app compared to something that is just an algorithm or perhaps it's an access control unit. So the next up, I'm going to talk about all of the different biometric standards that exist within biometrics, and that will influence the design, operation, management when you're building a biometric system to best practice, essentially. So the one you see at the top left is one that you might be most familiar with, which is the ISO 19795 Biometric Performance Testing and Reporting Standard. This international standard is very much focused on the accuracy and matching performance of a system, and to a lesser extent, some of the quality aspects as well. And it determines how you would run an evaluation and how you would report on the results of that evaluation. However, there's a lot more to a biometric system than just raw matching accuracy. So next up we have down the bottom, which is the presentation attack detection or liveness related standards. This is a new and a relatively new and developing area, and there is still some disagreement in the international community about the best way to standardize and to perform good, useful presentation attack detection testing. And for that reason, there are a number of different frameworks and standards around that. So there is the ISO 3107 standard, which you'll be most familiar with, which has a framework for performing testing and how to operate presentation attack detection technology. However, some of the other ones that exist are the BEAT framework out of the European Union for testing pad technology, NIST SOFA-B out of the US as well, which you may be familiar with. There's also the FIDO biometric requirements, which sets performance targets for matching accuracy as well as defining how different presentation attack detection tests must be performed. But there are also other ones that are still upcoming or still new. So some other ones to think about are the Android biometric security requirements, and there's also commercial frameworks that may exist within other laboratories, or they exist within specific industries, such as defining financial requirements or other digital identity schemes that might differ a little bit from some of the other standards or frameworks you see there. So those are the two main ones that I'm going to talk about today, but it is worth considering and thinking about some of the other international standards that can influence the design and operation of a biometric system. So other ones are ISO 19794 and 39794. These are data format standards. These define how biometric data should be formatted and stored, primarily with the goal of interoperability between systems. There's also quality-related standards, so 29197, 29794. I'll talk about the concept of biometric quality in a moment, as we feel it is extremely important to best practice in a biometric system. And depending on the type of system, there can be other things that are related here that can influence things. So I'll mention here ISO 29189, and that is an international standard around examiner-assisted biometric systems, where that's relevant. Not for all systems, but in a lot of cases it can be. So really having a well, an effective system is around, you've got to consider all these different types of standards and what's relevant, and performing testing and making sure your system is designed to meet these standards as much as possible. So next up, I'm going to talk about the Bixby Lab Journey, just at a bit of a high level here. So as Ted mentioned before, this starts with the NIST NVLAP, or National Voluntary Laboratory Accreditation Program, and that is the general requirements. So those are the general requirements for testing and calibration laboratories. That program is very much just the ISO 17025 standard that defines the requirements for testing and calibration laboratories, around how systems that need to be in place for managing quality, repeatability, and the integrity of experiments that are performed within the laboratory. And then the extension of that we're going through for our end result is the still within the NVLAP program, but around the requirements for biometric testing laboratories. And that's some additional requirements on top of the general requirements. And the result is Bixby Lab as a current applicant for the NIST NVLAP accredited biometrics testing laboratory program, with a specific scope of accreditation that you can see under there. So thinking back to the standards on the previous slide, so we're talking about the ISO 19795 standard around testing and reporting of biometric systems, and we also have the ISO 30107 for presentation attack detection testing, and that forms the scope of our accreditation as a biometrics testing laboratory. So next up, I'm going to talk about how we test biometric systems, or a little bit of an insight about the things that we feel are important and the factors that we consider into our testing, and we'll walk through those in a bit of a demonstration in a moment. So thinking about the concept of presentation attack detection, that ties into the vulnerability and liveness related aspects of a biometric system. So you can see an image up there just with some of the artifacts that we have in our laboratory. So things like 3D models, half full face masks, photographs, videos, more simple type artifacts, but that stretches across all modalities. So we also have things like fake fingers, ocular prosthetics for testing iris systems, as well as the ability to collect recordings and things like that we can use to attempt to spoof voice-based systems. So before I talk about the second part, I'll just show some of the items that I have next to me just today. So here we have, this is a 3D printed head that we've collected of my face. We have some fake fingers or fingerprints here. These with various molds, various substrates to create those. And then, like I mentioned before, we also have, from some recent iris testing, we have some ocular prosthetics as well. And then I'll talk through some other things in a moment, but a lot of this is also about controlling quality conditions as well. So we also have in my hand here, this is a sound meter essentially. So it's important for us to record environmental conditions in particular, and so this one will record sound, so we can use that when we're attempting to perform testing on a voice-based system, for example. So with that, the other part that I talk about is the quality factors. And a lot of this is about the interrelationship that exists between quality factors of biometrics and the vulnerability and liveness. Because where you do not have good quality data, you're more likely to have performance problems, which is both from a usability perspective, but also from a security perspective. And you can break down the quality aspects in a number of different ways. I'll talk through just some high-level categories there that we often talk about and the way that we often classify things. So we talk about population demographics. This is where you talk about things like age, gender, ethnicity within a biometric system and how that might affect performance. That's where you play into very topical modern things like talking about bias, etc. We talk about application factors. This is very much tied with usability. So things like a user's familiarity with the system impacting the way in which they use it and affecting the quality. We have user physiology, which is what are generally unchangeable characteristics of a person's appearance. So this might be something like scars, eye color, etc. So sort of unchangeable type characteristics. We have user behavior. So this is around the way that the user is behaving with the acquisition device. So it could be providing, an adverse pose, looking to the side, a non-neutral expression. For a voice type system, it might be the way that someone is pronouncing something, etc. We also have user appearance. So this is generally changeable characteristics of a way a person is appearing. So that can be things like glasses, face masks, very topical, hats, and things like that can be changed. We have environmental influences. So this is things like backgrounds, could be lighting, shadows, etc. And then lastly, we have the sensor and hardware. So this is focused on where we have different types of acquisition devices. They introduce different quality aspects. So a camera may, for example, produce a different type of image or a different quality of image compared to another one, and that affects our downstream matching outcomes as well. So in summary around the testing, what we look at is that relationship really between vulnerability and liveness and those quality factors. And where something you might be testing presentation attacks and they may be detected consistently, if we manipulate those quality factors, we may get quite a different result. So now I'm going to talk about the types of services that we provide through BixeLab that exist within our scope of accreditation. So the first one is around performance testing. So this is the ISO 19795 standard. And that defines 3 different types of evaluation that we're going to walk through, and I'll provide a bit of a demonstration in a moment. And the first type is a scenario evaluation. A scenario evaluation is an in-depth assessment of performance, and it's the type of assessment that you would associate with using a test crew and live test subjects to test use cases within the biometric system using both controlled and real-world scenarios. So an example for you might be a mobile app that is provided, to a test subject, within the laboratory, and they walk through the sort of end-to-end process of the biometric acquisition and the matching and getting the full outcome. This type of evaluation is extremely important because it can uncover usability or vulnerability type issues that you would not necessarily find through other types of evaluation, and particularly around that because it can often be very subtle changes around the front end or different things like that might influence the outcomes and introduce problems that you won't get just from performing a matching exercise. And the outcomes of that type of testing is we perform testing that is in compliance with the 19795 Part 2 standard using our BixeLab testing methods. And then we also provide a performance report that is built to the ISO 19795 Part 1 reporting standard. Those are the outcomes that we provide from that type of evaluation. Next up is the technology evaluation. So a technology evaluation is what you might be familiar with a NIST FRBT style evaluation. And this is the type of testing where you provide us with a piece of technology, a matching algorithm essentially, and then you either provide us with a data set or we use our data sets in-house to perform matching of those sets using that technology and then report on the results. This type of evaluation is very much focused on providing high degrees of confidence in the raw matching performance of a solution, a bit different to a scenario evaluation in that regard, with that higher confidence on the accuracy, but not necessarily honing in on some of those really specific vulnerability or potential usability problems. That also comes with a report that is again to the 19795 Part 1 reporting standard. The last type of performance testing is an operational evaluation. This is the type of testing or evaluation where you provide us with data outputs from your production system, and we can assess, analyze that data to identify and resolve performance problems. So that might be focusing on particular quality issues, particular vulnerability issues, etc., or looking at different devices or whatever exists within there. And that's testing that's in compliance with another part of the 19795 standard. And that also comes with a report to the 19795 reporting standard. So with that said, I'm going to walk through a little bit of a demonstration around a scenario type evaluation or elements of it. And the objective here is to perform a data collection process where we're collecting some controlled data that we can then perform some matching and then very quickly generate some outputs. So what you should be seeing on your screen now is my laboratory technician, Sonia, who's over there in a little setup that we have with a booth to collect some data, essentially. So with this, we have Sonia against a relatively plain wall. She's lit up with some photography lighting, and we're going to acquire some. We're going to start with a bit of a control type experiment or a control collection, and then we're going to look at manipulating some of those quality factors like I spoke about before. So with that said, so one of the things in this particular case, we're interested in lighting. So I have with me our light meter. And we're going to have a quick measurement here just to see where that's sitting. So sitting in that chair in front of that photography lighting, we're reading about 500 lux, which is about what we want for this type of testing. A normal office environment being between 400 to 600 lux, so 500 lux is perfect for what we want for a control experiment in those types of conditions. So we're going to start with, she's going to just look directly at the camera, providing a neutral expression, and we're going to capture a bit of a control type image to start our collection process. Okay, now we're going to have a look at changing some of those conditions. So if we think back to the quality factors, we're going to look at the user behavior. So we're going to provide pose in this particular circumstance. So we have a marker up to the left at about negative 15 degrees, and she's going to have a look up there, and we're going to capture another image. And now she's going to look up to another marker up the top right, so at 15 degrees in the opposite direction. And still within this user behavior, she's going to look directly at the camera and provide a big smile, non-neutral expression. And then now we're going to have a look at a different one. So we're going to have a look at the environmental influences. So still with this light meter in my hand, we're going to turn the lighting that we have off and take a new reading. So that's now reading around 250 lux. So that's sort of below average for an office environment. So we're deliberately modifying those quality factors to see the impact that it's going to have on the results after this data collection when we then go and match the images. Okay, now we're going to return back to the presentation and have a look at what we're going to do with that data. So what we've just done is we've just collected, we've performed that data collection process, and in a short amount of time using our control setup, we've collected a number of different images that we're then going to have a walk through that matching process and turn it into some analysis and reporting. So what you should be seeing now is we've performed some matching with a set of images that we've acquired in the same type of setup before, with some additional imagery in there, and we're looking at the highest scoring non-matches or imposters essentially. So as we sift through these results, where we've collected these and we've been able to tag and flag these images appropriately with those different quality conditions, such as 500 lux versus 250 lux, we can look at the different metadata around that imagery and then see how that's performing with our non-matches or our imposters. So one particular one of interest that stands out to me in this list is you can see row number 4 has an image of me with a changed user behavior, a pose off to the side. And you can see that that's matched or is within our higher scoring non-matches against an image which has a very similar pose. And as we sift through these different results, we might find similar trends of dark images matching against other dark images, or like that one, different poses matching against other poses. And these can present different vulnerabilities that exist within the system. And then the extension of that, again, furthering this with our Performix matching and reporting tool, we can turn this sort of data very quickly into different visualizations. So you can see on your screen now a score histogram, and we can use that to plot out how they're performing. We can look at those again with different quality conditions and see how these visualizations and how these statistics change as we look through the different conditions that we've captured in our laboratory and our facility. And then the extension of that is then turning those visualizations and those statistics into reporting. So this is, in the particular one you see on your screen here, is automated reporting capability. And this is taking that matching data that we've acquired, generating those visualizations and statistics, and turning that automatically into an ISO 19795 compliant report. So walking through that process, you can see how with our facilities and our equipment and what we provide, we can very quickly have a nice controlled data collection process, as well as adding in real world imagery. We can then match that. We can then explore that data, producing visualizations and statistics, and then turn that into an ISO 19795 compliant report in a very quick time frame. So having spoken about performance testing, the next part we're going to talk about is presentation attack detection testing, and this forms the other half of our scope of accreditation, essentially. The first thing to talk about here is around the BixeLab Expert Presentation Attack Detection Testing. This is a service that we have provided as BixeLab and as Biometrics for a number of years, and this is customized expert testing to meet specific requirements and provide high assurance in the performance of technology. This is testing that's based on our best practice and our experience in doing these types of evaluations. And it is certified testing that uses artifacts from sort of level 1, which is very simple artifacts, through to level 3, which is very complex artifacts. And again, that stretches across all modalities through face, finger, iris, and voice. The outcome of that type of testing is a compliance report against the BixeLab criteria. So the objective with this type of testing is testing that meets specific requirements where you need to have high assurance that the technology is performing effectively, or for the purposes of tuning that technology as well. So with that said, that is the BixeLab Expert Presentation Attack Detection Testing, but the next part is also around this level-based testing as defined by the 3107 standard within our scope of accreditation. So we can provide testing, again, across all modalities at level 1 and at level 2. And in doing that, we perform testing that is in compliance with ISO 3107 Part 3. And that is, again, certified testing that uses a selection of artifacts at the given level. The outcomes of that are a conformity assessment report against our BixeLab criteria, and also a NIST compliant test report. So next up, I'm going to talk about EIDV solutions and EIDV solution testing. This is an offering that is unique to BixeLab. We provide testing and evaluation services for EIDV solutions. For those that are not familiar, because they can go by a number of names, an EIDV solution is a type of solution that is becoming increasingly common, and it's generally based on a process where you take a photograph or some kind of scan of a document. You take a selfie image on a user's mobile device, and then you sort of perform a match between those two and attempt to determine whether or not that document is legitimate and matching it against various sources. So you may know them as other things like remote onboarding, digital onboarding, know your customer, AML, identity as a service. They come with a number of different names. This technology or these types of solutions are quite new, and they bring together a range of different technologies that I'll talk about in a moment to perform a complete identity verification solution. With that said, there's lots of different pieces of developing technology come together. It's extremely important that these are tested quite thoroughly, because there's a lot of different solutions in this industry that are doing things in a lot of different ways that are not necessarily best practice and will not necessarily provide the performance that you might be seeking. So with that said, we've performed this type of testing for a number of years, in particular for financial institutions who are acquiring these types of solutions. And we perform that testing in a number of different ways, and we look at testing some different areas of the technology. So I'll talk about that here. So one of the important things that we feel is important is testing these with multiple devices and platforms. So these sometimes are available on web platforms, but generally mobile focused. But it's important to test different devices, because the quality that you get out of the latest iPhone camera is quite different to what you might be getting in a 5-year-old Android phone, for example. And again, thinking back to before, that's a quality factor, the sensor and hardware, and that affects our vulnerability as well. The next part of this process is around the document, which is a big part of these types of solutions and a big part of the scope when we test this type of product. And that is the ability of the solution to do a few things. One is to verify the document, or at least identify the correct type of document. So knowing that this is an Australian passport or a New South Wales driver's license, or etc. Particularly, when we look at the US, and there are a range of different states that all have different driver's licenses. The next part of that is around the ability of these solutions to determine whether or not a document is authentic, altered, or false, based on that, particularly where it's based only on a photograph. There's the performance of optical character recognition, so reading of names, dates of birth, etc. from a document is important, because this really affects usability in a lot of ways, because it means the customer in this type of situation may or may not need to correct errors of the OCR, and it also might mean for the banks on the banking side of things where corrections need to be done on that side. This type of evaluation also includes some of the other things we spoke around before. So testing biometric matching and accuracy using various demographics is extremely important. Testing these types of solutions using varied quality conditions and environments. I'll talk about that again in a moment. And then lastly, of course, also testing the presentation attack detection technology as well. So you can see how we form this complete evaluation that contained within that evaluation is an ISO 19795 scenario evaluation. It is an ISO 3107 PAD evaluation, but also stretches out to include those document components and assessing the performance and accuracy of optical character recognition. So I walked through what an EIDV solution is and how we test it. So I have my assistant laboratory manager, Liam, who's going to come up here and provide, as a test subject to engage in some testing of a demonstration EIDV app that we have installed. So in his hand, he has an Android test device that we're going to use for this particular sort of experiment or test case. So he's loading that up now. So the first part in any of these types of solutions is to capture a photograph of the document. So he has there in his hand a passport type document. This is a one that is based on real details, based on real passport details. However, it is altered in that it has my photograph substituted over the top of the existing photograph on that document. So as he's capturing that document, you can think about different scenarios where with different types of documents, because when we test these types of solutions, we always look to test a range of different types of documents, particularly where the end solution is going to accept a lot of different types of documents. Some of the considerations here are the differences between driver's licenses and passports. So passports generally more difficult to spoof in this type of situation. It can be easier to convince a solution that it is a real driver's license when it is not. But there's also other factors to consider, such as the types of the countries or country of origin of different documents as well. So where a solution may be very effective, so in an Australian context, for example, it may be very effective at taking a photograph of an Australian passport and determining whether or not that's real. Where it's presented with perhaps a passport from the United States, it may be far less effective at determining whether or not that's real. And that varies a lot between the different solutions and the technology that they have. So Liam's just completed that process there. So you can see in this particular one, it's accepted that false document as a genuine one. So the next part in this process is providing a selfie, essentially. So we're going to, combining a few test cases here together for the demonstration. Liam's donned a half face mask of myself and is now engaging in the selfie process. So we're going to see what the result of this particular presentation attack is, but it's also worth thinking as well about the different quality factors that are going to influence the way that this performs. So he has this half face mask on. We're going to look at the result, but where we do different tests and experiments, we might vary the quality, because we might find that this mask will be detected, but if we were to change like the lighting conditions, the pose, or other different aspects of the quality, we might find it might be much more likely to be falsely accepted. And it's important to remember that this goes for both the face as well as the document, because in these types of solutions, the customer or in your potential fraudster in a lot of ways is responsible for the acquisition of the document and the selfie. And in doing that, they may they are responsible for determining the quality of the matching, what they're going to be matching against, if that makes sense. So they're controlling that document photograph as well as the selfie. So having a look at the result there, of that one, we've provided a sufficient quality image to match, which is good. We've also defeated the liveness in that we've received a liveness score, which is above the current threshold. We have a decent match score there. However, it was not sufficient to match. But as I said before, you can see where we vary the quality conditions, we might start seeing different results where that image may start to match as well. So moving on from EIDV, I'm going to talk about some of our other services that we provide through BixeLab. So we're looking at analysis services. So we provide ad hoc periodic analysis of biometric data or data sets that you provide to us. That could be raw biometric data. It could also be matching results. And we can provide analysis services to investigate potential performance problems, quality, or vulnerability issues within that data. It could be bias, it could be impacts of different quality aspects. And the outcomes of that, we can provide a report and recommendations that improve usability, increase security, and reduce the risk. Next up is around training services. So we can provide in-person and remotely delivered training on topics within biometrics and identity. Within that, and we provide that type of service already in a lot of parts of the world. And we also note in this part that this type of training is increasingly important for digital identity and biometrics-based schemes, and specifically, at least within an Australian context, it is mandatory in some cases. So we have a new digital identity framework, the Trusted Digital Identity Framework in Australia, and in doing that, there are mandatory biometrics and identity training components of that for relevant staff that are engaged within the TDIF framework. Next up is around governance. So we provide support and services that ensure good governance of biometrics and identity systems. So that can be around establishing good management frameworks to ensure that roadmaps and things like that for system upgrades, thresholds are changed appropriately and good processes are in place to do that. Biometric systems are inherently probabilistic. They're always dynamic, always changing, and having good governance over them is extremely important. We can also provide periodic and ongoing assurance reporting, so a bit like the operational evaluation I spoke about before. So this is the type of situation where you provide us data on a periodic type basis. We provide the assurance by analysing that data to make sure it's continuing to deliver on the performance outcomes that you're seeking. And then lastly is around security review and red team review. So we can provide assistance with red teaming exercises, so evaluations or security assessments where you're very specifically interested in seeking ways to break that system. So you can then perform a security review and implement appropriate mitigations on your biometric or identity system. So with that, I'm going to thank you for attending the demonstrations. I hope that was useful. I'm going to hand over to Ted, who's going to provide a summary, and then we'll revert to questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. I hope that was interesting and informative for everybody. I certainly appreciate that you've been able to attend this session. We, as I mentioned at the start, will be producing a video as a result of this and sending you out a copy of that. If you have any further questions after this session or would like to reach out, you can send an email either to the contact details that are provided as part of the pack, or you can send it to info@bixelab.com. The other thing to mention is we will be having, we have a LinkedIn site for BixeLab. We'll be posting regular relevant updates to that. So please feel free to follow us on LinkedIn as well. We will be looking forward to engaging with all of you to help make sure that we have risk accredited and best practice solutions deployed around the world. So thank you very much, and I'll look forward to maybe being in touch with many of you once travel restrictions are a little bit more eased.